Good evening. On behalf of the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center, it is a great honor to welcome you to the commemoration of the United Nations Holocaust Memorial Day. We gather tonight to pay tribute to the over 6 million Jewish victims of the Shoah on the day of the liberation of the extermination camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau 77 years ago. In 2005, the United Nations General Assembly designated this day as the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, to be observed the world over. On January 27, 1945, troops from the 322nd Rifle Division of the Soviet Army reached the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau. The horrific suffering, cruelty, and killing that took place there was, and is, difficult to put in words, given its unimaginable scale and depravity. Although the camp had been evacuated and abandoned by the Germans in the days before, the Soviet soldiers found over 7,000 severely ill and malnourished inmates, many of them children, piles of corpses, hundreds of thousands of items of clothing, spectacles, shoes, and several tons of human hair. It is the sheer magnitude of the Holocaust that is so difficult to comprehend. The Shoah shattered European civilization. The destruction of Jewish life in Europe, and that of other groups such as the Sinti and the Romani, at the hands of Germany and its wartime allies, has left a wound that has yet to heal. The Holocaust was a terrifying process, a process of the deliberate and systematic destruction of Jewish life in all its forms and across all of Europe. The most lethal and barbaric stage of this process, the so-called final solution, was implemented after the infamous Wannsee Conference of January 1942, exactly 80 years ago. What followed from the decisions taken at the conference was killing on a terrifying industrial scale. In many places that used to have vibrant Jewish communities, little remains. One of these places is Greece, the home of Europe's oldest Jewish community. Between mid-1943 and late 1944, almost 90% of Greek Jews were transported to Auschwitz-Birkenau in unspeakable conditions and murdered there. The story of the Jewish community in Greece is relatively untold, and that is why we have decided to highlight it for this year's commemoration. Tonight, we are profoundly honored to be joined by a survivor from Greece, Ms Lola Angel, who will share her story of suffering, despair, and survival against all odds.
Consul General Cutlass, Consul General Latti, Dr. Walsh, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm deeply honored to be invited to today's commemoration of the United Nations Holocaust Memorial Day. Many thanks go to the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center for organizing this event so that we can come together again this year, albeit online, to pay tribute to victims and survivors and to remember the lessons of one of the darkest times in the modern human history. 17 years ago, the United Nations General Assembly designated 27th January as the United Nations Holocaust Memorial Day, which coincides with the liberation of Auschwitz, the most notorious Nazi concentration camp, in which over 1 million people lost their lives. We are all obligated to learn about the Holocaust and to teach our next generation about these past atrocities, not only to prevent discrimination, but also to advance tolerance and understanding among people of the world. Founded over a decade ago, the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center has taken the important missions of promoting Holocaust education and tolerance throughout the region. Through its work with the international and local schools in Hong Kong, as well as public exhibitions and film screenings, the center teaches universal values and helps shape Hong Kong into a city that is inclusive and big-hearted. It is my great honor to introduce tonight's speaker, Ms Lola Angel. She is one of the few Greek Jews left to remember the horror of the Nazi concentration camps. Approximately 83% of her community nearly 59,000 people were exterminated when Greece was occupied by Nazi Germany. 7 decades later, Lola is speaking with us tonight to pass on her remarkable story of courage and resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Angel, please. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank very much the Consulate General of Israel, as well as the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center, for their invitation to participate today on the commemoration of the United Nations Holocaust Memorial Day, celebrated each year on the 27th of January. This year commemoration is focused especially on my country, Greece, and the Holocaust of Greece, and especially on the Holocaust that took place in Thessaloniki, a city where many Jews fled after 1492, expelled from Spain, a city which I come from too as well. Distinguished guests, United Nations Holocaust Memorial Day is a day that reminds us always of the atrocities and of the suffering endured by the Jewish people during the Second World War. This day, along with all the other days of the year, of course, should be a constant reminder of the mistakes that we committed back then, mistakes that led to these atrocities, mistakes that should never be repeated again. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to introduce Mrs. Lola Angel, a survivor of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Mrs. Angel was born in Thessaloniki in 1937. She was a descendant of Jewish people that fled from Spain, expelled from Spain in 1492, and were led to Thessaloniki. Mrs. Angel, along with her family, left Thessaloniki. They fled Thessaloniki in 1941 in order to avoid the arrests and the pressure by the German occupation power in Thessaloniki. After the occupation, and she fled to Athens in order to hide under the anonymity of a bigger city. After the occupation of the German forces, after the occupation of Greece from the German forces in 1942, Mrs. Lola Angel stayed in Athens until 1944, and in April 1944 she was put, along with her family, in a train to an unknown destination. A train that was packed with hundreds, thousands of Jewish people that suffered unbearable conditions en route. Many of them passed away during their traveling. This train was supposed to be an effort to exchange Spanish nationals with German prisoners. The train arrived at Bergen-Belsen in 1944. From April 1944 to April 1945, Mrs. Angel lived in Bergen-Belsen in a camp where really the conditions and the hardships suffered by the people were incredible. Starvation, overwork, diseases were torturing and were afflicting the people every day in Bergen-Belsen. Mrs. Lola Angel, as she's going to tell you in a moment, has spent her 7th birthday in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. And she's going to remind you that she spent her 7th birthday with a piece of bread and sticks like candles. This is one of the few things that kept her going, as she's going to tell us in a minute after my introduction. Mrs. Angel, along with the other prisoners, were put on a train in 1945, just before the liberation of Bergen-Belsen by the British forces, and were sent to northern Germany in a last-minute effort of the German forces to exterminate the survivors of the concentration camp. Fortunately, this train was abandoned by its guards just a few days along the road, guards that fled the train, and the prisoners that were inside the train were saved by the American soldiers. On the same day, the British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen. That was April 1945. After her liberation, Mrs. Angel and her family, and after many hardships and traveling and refugee centers on the way, arrived in Bari and then subsequently to Greece, in Greece and Thessaloniki in September of 1945. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you Mrs. Lola Angel. Thank you.
Hello, I am Lola Angel from Athens. I was born in Thessaloniki, Greece in 1937 from Sepharad parents, that is, Jews that came from Spain when Queen Isabella threw them away. We kept our Spanish nationality till today. We live in Thessaloniki in a house, in a beautiful villa, who was in the first floor, the Alvo family. On the second floor, we stay with my parents. On 1940, when the Italian invasion began, my father was afraid to stay in Thessaloniki. So he took us, me and my mother, and we came to Athens. Till April 41, we stayed in an hotel. April, before the entry of the Germans in Athens, we rented a small, very small house where we stayed with my uncle also. On 1944, on the 25th of March, at 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 Germans and one with civil clothes knocked on our door. My father didn't open the door immediately. He took some time so that his little brother, Marcel, could go by the back door to the terrace and saved himself. He then called the ambassador of Spain, Radigales de Romero, and told him that he was being taken. He opened the door, the Germans came in and broke the telephone, took my father away, and told my mother that in the morning we had to be in the synagogue. My mother, frantic, the first thing she did was to burn the false identification cards we had. She burned them, and then she knocked on the neighbors and gave them all the things that we had at home. In the morning, the wife of the ambassador of Spain, Elena de Romero, came to my house. She asked my mother to leave me with her so I won't be taken by the Germans. My mother hesitated, so we went to the synagogue in the embassy car, and when we arrived, she went to find my father. My father asked her, "What about the group of Thessaloniki that went to Bergen-Belsen?" We knew that Franco had taken them to Spain, and from there they were sent to Gaza in Israel, and they were saved. So he thought that the same thing will happen with us, and they decided to keep me with them. On the third, some days we stay in, we were taken in Haidari camp. It was an old soldier camp. There we slept on the floor, ate what they gave us. There came my mother-in-law to be with her son of 9 years old, Ida Angel. She was hidden as a maid in the house of a secretary of the Spanish embassy. She was betrayed. She was taken to Merlin SS headquarters, and there she was beaten. We saw her in a haidari, full of blood, with her teeth broken. On the 2nd of April, we were taken to the station and put in the trains. Our wagon was closed without window, just a small open near the roof. The stench was terrible. We sat on the floor. People were frantic, crying, and I remember myself crying a lot. We didn't know where we were going. Fear, everybody was afraid. My father, who was very tall, used to take me in his arms and put my nose, my face near the window and told me, take breath, Lola. He wanted me to have clean air. Arriving in Vienna, the train stopped. It separated. Those with the Spanish passport went one way. The ones with the Greek passport went to Auschwitz. My mother-in-law went to Auschwitz. We went to Bergen-Belsen. Arriving in Bergen-Belsen, well, I don't remember many things. The only things I remember is a shot we got on our chest. What I remember is my mother, who put me on a stone to keep me in her level, and she told me in French, here you will do whatever I ask you to do. You never ask why. This makes me more afraid. I got a lump on my throat. We were driven to the camp, to the barrack. We were separated by the men. We didn't stay in one camp all the time we went in Bergen-Belsen. We changed camps. The first one, I slept with my mother and a friend of her in between them. I was not supposed to have a bed. I was 7. In the morning, at 5 o'clock, we had to go outside and had the appel. They have to count us. It was very, very cold. And this counting took many time. Then we were free to go to clean ourselves and to have something to eat. Normally it was a small bit of bread. My father was responsible for giving the soup. He calculated how much food he had to give to everybody, but to the children he gave a little more. The soup consisted of a liquid with the course of the potato, and if you are lucky enough, you could get a potato and some bread. That was all, for all day long. As a child, I used to play. I had a friend, Leonie Coboton, and we of the same age, and we used to play. We used to see the small rats that came out of the barrack. During captivity, I had got measles, a very bad sort of it. When you was ill, you didn't have to go to the appel. You just got your arm out of the bed, and the German guard will slap you, so you were sure to be counted. Those measles left me with a bad lung that I have through the years. On October 1944, women from Auschwitz came to Bergen-Belsen. We couldn't speak to them because we were separated by barbed wire, but we can scream names. Perhaps we could know about our family. They didn't answer. They were in a very bad shape. In between them was my mother-in-law, Ida Angel, without her child. Upon arriving in Auschwitz, he was driven to the gas chamber. On the 2nd of April 1945, we were taken again in the trains. We didn't know where we were going. Bombs were falling over us, and I remember my mother putting her body over me and my father his body over my mother so they could make a shelter. We arrived in Magdeburg. There, the train stopped. The guards fled. We didn't know what to do. We were without food, without water. So some young men broke the doors, and we were sitting in the foot of the wagons, looking around for some food. Some men went to the fields and got some potatoes. So people ate raw potatoes. And then the Americans came. First, some soldiers with branch on their heads. And we were astounded to see them. And then a big lorry came with food and more men, so they put us in a line. And the first thing they did, after taking our names, they put us DDT, because we were full of lies. And they gave us a soup, and I remember I got my first chewing gum. From there we were driven to Farsleben, a small German village. There we went to a house. They put us in a house with the Germans' family inside. They gave us food, warm water, and a soft bed. Out of the house, there was an American sentinel. In the morning, as we were leaving, my mother saw a dagger on the table. The German was an officer, so she took the dagger and told him, "The conqueror takes the arm of the defeated." And she took the arm, and I have it here in my home. From there, we went walking to a barn where we stayed in the night. During the night, there was a fire in the barn. Some people just made a fire to make some tea. I remember I lost my mother, and I went out of the barn to look for her, and I couldn't see her, and I went inside again, and my hair got fire. So a lady took me and didn't let me to go again, and we met with my mother. From the barn, we were driven to Irlesleben. Irlesleben was another small town with no Germans. The houses were empty. So we went to a house and we stayed with my mother, father, and my mother's brother. There the Americans, there was a doctor who saw us. He gave me a special medicine. It was some big things like injections, and it was full of blood, and I had to drink something like this. From Irlesleben, where we stay about a month, we were put in trains again, but with open doors, with windows. And we went to Holland, where we left the people that were from Netherlands. And we arrived in Belgium, in Brussels. We were put in a poor house. There my father found his cousins, and they got us out of the poor house. They rented a room in a small village, and we stayed there. From Brussels, we went to Paris. For 2 days, we met with my aunt and uncle and cousins. From Paris, we went to Marseille in a cloister. We stayed about a week. And then from there, with this English boat, I remember the name, Ascania, we went to Bari refugee camp. Bari was terrible. It was overcrowded. It was really bad. On the 11th of September 1945, we came back to Greece. We didn't have any money except some packets of cigarettes, American cigarettes. With these cigarettes, we took a taxi to go to my uncle Marcel's house. Going up the street, my mother saw him out of the window of the taxi. She stopped the taxi, and it was a pandemonium, because everybody was screaming that had people from the camps, and I was terribly afraid. my aunt came. She took me on her arms, and I remember kicking her because I was afraid of being separated from my parents. When we arrived home, she put me down in front of a toy, and then I calmed myself. It's very difficult when we came back. No home, no work, no money, bad health, very bad health. My mother had ulcer, my father tuberculosis, and I was mummified. We didn't have a house. Till February of 1946, we could get back our one-room apartment. The neighbors gave us back all our things, and we were grateful. My father began working. He had in the Spanish embassy, he had left a big box of pencils, number Faber pencils, and something that the women used to use when they washed white clothes. So he put this on his shoulder and began selling pencil and this loulaki, as they call it in Greek. From this, he began, with the money he got, he bought more merchandise. And 10 years later, we could rent a normal house on 1955. That's my story.
On January 27, 1945, Anatoly Shapiro, a Jewish captain in the Red Army, arrived with his battalion to Auschwitz concentration camp and opened the gates to hell. In his memoirs, he recalled, "The first things I saw is a bunch of people standing outside in the snow. They were so weak they couldn't turn their heads to us. I told them, the Red Army is here to liberate you. They came to touch us to see if it's real." Since 2005, this date, January 27, is marked as the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, as declared by the United Nations to remember the mass genocide of the Jews in Europe and to carry on from generation to generation the lessons of the Holocaust, as well as the big warning sign of what one human being can cause to another and what are the results of racism and bigotry. The Holocaust is a unique phenomenon, and the main lesson of it for the Jewish people, and not only for them, is never again. And this is a universal lesson, and a lesson that we should all work hard for it in order for future generations to learn and learn. What marked the beginnings of this systematic genocide happened exactly 18 years ago and 1 week in a quiet suburb of Berlin called Wannsee. 14 officials of the Nazi Party, not policymakers, but rather high-level bureaucrats, met to discuss what was called the final solution of the Jewish problem. This conference symbolizes the beginnings of the mass, well-planned, systematic murder of the European Jews. The number of the Holocaust survivors is reducing every year, but their voices and lessons would never be faded. With thanks to tonight's special guest, Ms Lola Angel, tonight, 6 candles will be lit in memory of the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust. We will now commence the lightings.
These 6 candles symbolize the 6 million who died in the Shoah. The 6 candles that we light in their honor stand for our unshakable commitment that we will not forget. The first candle is dedicated to the victims of the ghettos, transit camps, and transports. The second candle is dedicated to the victims of the concentration camps. The third candle is dedicated to the victims of the killing sites. The fourth candle is dedicated to the victims of the death camps. The fifth candle is dedicated to the victims of the death marches. The sixth candle is dedicated to the other victims, the Sinti, the Romani, the mentally and physically handicapped, political prisoners, resistance fighters, homosexuals, and prisoners of war.
אל מלא רחמים שוכם במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר רקיע מזהירין, הן נשמות הקדושים והטהורים, שהומתו ושנהגו, ושנשחטו, ושנשרפו, ושנטבעו, ושנחנקו על קידוש השם, על ידי הצוררים הגרמנים יימח שמם וזכרם, בעבור שבלי נדת אין צדקה, בעד הזכרת נשמותיהם, וגן עדן תהא מנוחתם, לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרו בצרור החיים מנשמותיהם, אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר אמן.
We're truly blessed that we still have eyewitnesses, such as Lola Angel, who can tell us what happened to them and their families during the Holocaust, in their own words. From all of us in Hong Kong, I want to express my most sincere gratitude and say a big thank you to Lola for sharing her story with us. But in the not-so-distant future, a day will come when no more survivors remain, when their voices will have fallen silent. This certainty makes it even more important to keep the memory alive, to reflect, to study, to remember, and to educate. After all, anti-Semitism, discrimination, ethnic, religious, and racial hatred, war, and terrible crimes against humanity remain realities in our world. I hope that the story of Lola Angel can serve as a reminder and inspiration to us all to try to make a difference, to treat each other with dignity and respect, to overcome mistrust and prejudice, to stand up and speak out against intolerance. Finding Holocaust survivors who are willing and able to tell their story and agree to be interviewed from afar is not an easy task. Identifying a survivor is one thing. Getting this person to speak in public is another. There are health issues, COVID restrictions, technical problems, language barriers, and time zones to overcome. It may not seem apparent, but this is a complex process that involves many people in many different capacities. The fact that we were able to witness Lola Angel tonight is mainly due to the hard work and dedication of Christine Vallier, Delia Alkhanati, Robbie Negrin, Glenn Timmermans, Simon Lee, and Geoffroy Vallier, as well as our videography teams in Greece, Canada, and Hong Kong. I would also like to thank the Secretary for Innovation and Technology, Mr. Alfred Sidwing Hung, Padide Troyanov, Russell Davidson, Consul General Amir Lati, and the entire team at the Consulate General of the State of Israel in Hong Kong, Consul General Konstantinos Katoulas, and the Consulate General of the Hellenic Republic in Hong Kong, the trustees of the Oholea Synagogue Trust, the management of the JCC, and all of our donors and sponsors. Without their incredible generosity, steadfast interest, and proactive support, none of this would be possible.